He was the fake medium from Florida whose scandalous cons almost got him shot. So why did M. Lamarckine then blow the whistle on psychic swindlers? I, Lamarckine, hereby affirm and warrant that the experiences related in this book, written in collaboration with Alan Spraggett and William Rauscher, are the truth and nothing but the truth, though, it should be added, not necessarily the whole truth, which would be even worse. These experiences are from my career of 13 years as a fraudulent spiritualist medium. Lamarckine.
A book about spiritualism seems a little out of date, even during the current resurgence of paranormal beliefs under the New Age banner. There's something quaint, and obviously bogus, about little old ladies invoking ghosts who spew ectoplasm and world trumpets about the place. It's as if the special effects have been forsaken these days, in favor of vague pronouncements over the meaningfulness of what you have named being in 35,000-year-old warriors from Atlantis. The spiritualism described in this book has a kind of pre-war feeling about it, next to the New Age. It's like putting a velvet black digital stereo rack system next to an old Philco radio in its cathedral-shaped oak case, with maybe some Glenn Miller or Kay Kaiser floating out of its fuzzy speaker. But, getting back to the subject, this is a pretty rare sort of book. The vast majority of books about the paranormal are strongly pro, with rarely a hint of doubt. They're filled with wonderful and intriguing stories, and much of the drama is skewed towards encouraging the reader to believe that something truly astounding is going on. Rarely are books written debunking these claims. A casual appraisal of the local Bede Daltons won't turn up more than 2 or 3 on an occult rack holding 100 titles. Books debunking the paranormal operate under several constraints and burdens that pro-paranormal books simply don't have. First and foremost, debunkers are in the position of telling people that things they want to believe may not be so. And, as the Psychic Mafia details, the will to believe is surprisingly strong. Even when a medium admits to fakery, there are those who persist in believing that he's genuine, or resorts to trickery only when under pressure, or that the presence of skeptics somehow causes the psychic to fake it, or well, you get the idea. Second, because the debunker has to overcome this will to believe, he has to make his arguments that much more forceful. The only thing on his side is the research required, and his audience's ability to reason. Many paranormal books repeat many of the stories published in others, occasionally with a little embellishment here and there. But the debunker must track down the correct details, stick to established sources, cut away the intriguing details that the mythmongers have added, and appraise the claim as honestly as possible. I'm speaking from experience when I say that any flaw in one's arguments, real, imagined or irrelevant, becomes the devastating blow to science that the true believer seizes upon. Third, these added details have become facts in the mind of the believer. And the debunker is then called upon to explain every little aspect of a claim, real or mythical. If he can't, the believer walks away feeling that the debunker hasn't done his job. For example, Philip Klass has investigated most of the major UFO sightings over the past 2 decades, and has explanations for all that he's investigated. But the UFO believer can always mention some obscure sighting or event that Klass hasn't had the resources to investigate. If Klass can't debunk that one, well, that just proves to the true believer that Klass hasn't proven his case. Fourth, there is a peculiar mythology about paranormal claims and science that colors every debate on the subject. Proponents of paranormal claims frequently present themselves as heretics whose unconventional views and disconcerting data threatens to overturn all of established science, and that's why, they claim, science refuses to acknowledge this data. Strangely, most of the unconventional heresies are old orthodoxies. Creationism, astrology, the powers of prophets and seers, some aspects of herbalists' claims, tarot cards, the existence of ghosts, etc., that were overturned by the heretics of science. In this sense, many pro-paranormalists seem not only somewhat conservative, upset at how science threatens conventional beliefs, but can legitimately be turned reactionaries, demanding that progress and change not only be halted, but reversed. This may seem like an extreme assertion, and I admit, it is somewhat unconventional, but only if we adopt the framework of science being the orthodoxy, with old mythologies being the heresy. Imagine if someone were to claim that the medieval theologians were correct. The Earth is the center of the universe, and the planets rotate about it in crystal spheres. That person will very likely present his view as unorthodox heresy, undermining the authority of monolithic, conservative science, even though, centuries ago, his claim was the orthodoxy in more oppressive times, enforced with torture and imprisonment, and the cosmology we take for granted today was a truly dangerous heresy to believe in. One can appraise many other pseudoscientific beliefs in this manner, and easily understand how, rather than challenging popular myth or unquestioned orthodoxy, they actually perpetuate and enforce it. Science's process of self-revision marks it as far more inherently heretical than most religious or political outlooks, and demanding of a more subtle understanding of the world. 5 And on the whole, it's been far more tolerant of opposing opinion than most religious or mystical institutions. Fifth, and finally, the debunker frequently has to explain science to his readers, and this is a delicate art that even only a few scientists can do. For example, an astrologer can simply say, "The moon causes tides, doesn't it? Human beings are 90% water. Do you really doubt that whole planets don't influence our lives?" But someone debunking astrology must explain why this analogy is false, and how gravity really behaves, and why human beings just don't have enough mass for the moon's gravity to affect them to any great degree. And sadly, many of these explanations sail right over people's heads. The few books which have had a measurable impact in debunking paranormal claims share one important aspect: they provide an inside view into how things are done. A book like Douglas Stocker and Clark Glymore's anthology examining holistic medicine, which dissects such claims as chiropractic, visualization therapy, and homeopathy in detail, doesn't affect someone in the same way as James Randi's excellent The Faith Healers. Randi not only discusses the medical aspects of faith healing, but exposes the deliberate fraud of several faith healers. Randi makes a story out of it. The investigation is fascinating by itself, but Randi describes such wonderful tricks as direct mail fundraising, the selling of blessed trinkets, the way the money is spent, etc. In other words, people may not want to bother with scientific principles involved, but they love to see how the special effects work. Such a book is the Psychic Mafia. The critical reader will find a lot in this book to criticize. The writing is awkward in places, and the habit of ending chapters with ellipses is irritating. The chapter Sex in the Seance has some passages that haven't aged well into the 1990s, especially the sniggering remarks on homosexuality. I get the impression that these two troublesome aspects of the book come from co-author Alan Spraggett, mainly because of certain aspects of his book Arthur Ford, the Man Who Spoke with the Dead. See Appendix 1 for details. Another issue should be mentioned at the outset. While Keen's story is fascinating in and of itself, not much can be said for William Rauscher or Alan Spraggett's participation in the project. Spraggett, a former fundamentalist preacher, proclaimed himself a psychic investigator and had a radio program about the unexplained. He wrote a series of books about what he considered to be legitimate paranormal events, such as astrology, and the spirit mediums whose trickery he couldn't detect. Rauscher, as you'll see in his foreword, is convinced of the reality of psychic phenomena as well. Apparently, one has to be a truly inept medium to be debunked by these guys, see Chapter 6, or be a former fraud who brings his story to them, see Appendix 1. One truly wishes that Keen had sat down with someone else for this book, someone more critical-minded, or with better training as a journalist. About this computer disk edition. So, why did I go through the trouble of converting this book to computer text? Because the book is so hard to find, mainly. I felt that a lot of people would get some benefit from it. I've also taken the liberty of adding footnotes, which did not appear in the original text. Usually, they're meant to provide additional information or a different perspective on the events described in a passage from another book describing similar events, more info on various people mentioned in the book, etc. With William Rauscher's foreword, for example, I couldn't help getting a little sarcastic. It's also been my experience that material stored electronically has a better chance of staying available. Copies can be made in seconds. Topics and passages can be found with the help of a good search feature in a word processor. The material can be excerpted into a research paper or essay with little fuss. The text may find its way into something more permanent, like a CD-ROM or database. Also, material stored electronically is far more malleable. Those who have poor or failing eyesight can print a copy in larger than normal type, and blind computer users can use any of several programs that read text and use a sound synthesizer to simulate a human voice reading the material aloud. So, to do this book a service, please distribute as many copies as possible. Upload it onto computer bulletin boards, preferably in straight ASCII format as well as WordPerfect. Give printouts to friends, especially the ones who want to pay psychics for powers they don't have. We're not cutting Dell out of any profits, because they haven't published the book since 1977. And those of us who circulate this book aren't making money out of this at all. By the way, if Lamar Keen is out there reading this, I hope you're doing well, and wish you the best of luck. Best regards. The Anonymous Typist. 1. The trans-channelers of today have it pretty damn easy, too. I remember back when a medium actually had to work at her job, busting her buns at the research needed to convince you that she really was talking to your dead Uncle Carl. These young whippersnappers, with their crystals and their Gaia consciousness and their new paradigms, why, they couldn't do a spirit report if Eusapia Palladino held their hands for and they wouldn't know a piece of ectoplasm if you slapped him in the face with it. Dagnabbit, it just ain't the same. 2. Charles Berlitz's books are notorious for this. Larry Kush, in his The Bermuda Triangle Mysteries Solved, details how Berlitz would take a tour. 3-line description of a missing ship, and add paragraphs of dramatic details, all out of his own imagination. 3. A similar dodge that paranormalists are fond of is criticizing the debunkers for going after easy targets while ignoring others that are really important. One person told me that she felt that Randy was a coward for going after obvious frauds, naming Uri Geller as an example. I pointed out to her that, when Randy investigated Geller, he was considered a serious psychic by many respected parapsychologists. It wasn't until Randy had exposed Geller's tricks that Geller was discredited. Only then could she safely call Geller an obvious fraud. This can be considered a cardinal rule of the paranormal. All paranormal events reported are important and unexplainable. Until they are explained, then they are easy targets. For the idea that science actively ignores anomalous data is both partially true and laughably false. It's true in the sense that some amazing events and phenomena aren't as well investigated as others, for example, rains of frogs, but it's also true that an extensive body of research on strange occurrences exists in William Corliss's fascinating sourcebook project. Whether or not the strange occurrences really spell doom for the scientific method, or science as an institution, is doubtful. 5. How subtle or understanding is it when someone can be described or dismissed as a typical Aries, or with, these Pisces, all moody and emotional. Substitute the astrological signs with adjectives like Irish, Black, Hispanic, Jewish, or white, and astrology takes on a somewhat sinister dimension. 6. In fact, Randy himself illustrates this principle. His first 3 books of the truth about Uri Geller, Flim Flam, and the Faith Healers, are devastating. Powerful expose of everything from psychics to astrology to pyramid power, written in a spirited, take-no-prisoners style. His latest book, The Mask of Nostradamus, is a first-class work of scholarship, and is perhaps the only worthwhile book currently in print on the subject. But because Randy is writing about someone who lived hundreds of years ago, and whose reputation is based on the odd matches of others, there's little in the way of special effects to expose. Because Randy's not dealing with as dramatic a subject, the book isn't quite the same bombshell as The Faith Healers was. 7. I know the term computer text isn't as precise as it should be, but how many people who are unfamiliar with computers will understand what ASCII, DOS text, or WordPerfect version 5.1 format are? 8. That's why I didn't include an index. I tried tagging various items for the index, but after about 2 chapters worth, after trying to decide whether to tag a phrase with Keen, Lamar M, works in grocery store, or maybe get really detailed like ectoplasm, technique to create, or chiffon, uses fake ectoplasm, or after a while I figured stuff it, and erased the whole damn index. That's why God, in His infinite wisdom, gave us the word search feature. 9. Journalist I.F. Stone, writing his The Trial of Socrates when he was well into his 80s, offered an acknowledgement to his Macintosh. Its fat, large Chicago font allowed Stone to get some serious writing done in spite of cataracts. Stone was one of America's finest independent journalists, by the way, and any of his books is a treat.
This book is true. At first, when I met Lamar Keene, the former fraudulent medium whose story it is, I found his revelations in some respects almost incredible. Oh, I knew, as does every serious investigator of the psychic scene, and I have been one for more than 18 years, that fraud existed. There was the expose at Camp Chesterfield in 1960, described in this book, when infrared film of a materialization seance showed that the spirits were staff mediums dressed up in chiffon ectoplasm. I had personally checked out Camp Silver Bell, a spiritualist establishment in Ephrata, Pennsylvania, and Camp Chesterfield, and found rampant fraud. And I had heard of other cases, other exposures. But with all the whispers, rumors, and suspicions, and nobody really knew how widespread the fraud was, whether it was organized or haphazard, or whether spiritualist authorities actively connived in it or merely winked at it. What was needed to set us straight was the inside story from someone who knew. And who would know? Only one who had been part of the fraud. We now have that story in this book. Lamar Keene's account is supported by a wealth of documentary evidence, which I have examined. I have met and talked with some of those he duped while he was a medium. I have checked out the church of which he formerly was minister medium. His story is fact, not fiction. In my judgment, this book may be one of the most significant in the recent history of psychical research. It will not be so important for the professional parapsychologist, who no doubt will tend to feel that Lamar's tricks wouldn't have fooled him, as for the interested layman, the average person who shares today's popular fascination with anything psychic. The enormous rise of interest in psychic phenomena and ESP in the last 10 years has made it easier for the fake medium and clairvoyant to gain clients. A recent poll showed that a majority of Americans now believe in such phenomena. This new climate of opinion is a gold mine for the phony psychic. The general public, softened up by watching mentalists on television and reading in popular magazines about psychic experiments in labs and universities, is prone to overbelief. The average person is exceedingly easy to fool. No book could ever detail all the methods by which the fake psychic or medium performs his wonders. Most people, with no inkling of such methods, believe in psychic phenomena much too readily. This may sound strange coming from one who accepts the reality of paranormal manifestations, as attested in my own book, The Spiritual Frontier, an account of my psychic explorations. However, I have spent as much time arguing some people out of an overly credulous attitude toward the subject as arguing others into being open-minded toward it. As Lamar's story devastatingly reveals, the greatest friend the fraudulent medium has is overbelief on the part of his victims. Lamar calls it the true believer syndrome. The need to believe in phony wonders sometimes exceeds not only logic but, seemingly, even sanity. A portrayal of this very attitude can be found in the unusual opera, The Medium, by Giancarlo Menoudi. The central character is a fake medium, Madame Flora, who one day tells her sitters that all the wonderful phenomena she has produced were fraudulent. And the result of this confession? The sitters refuse to believe her.